There is a world on the other side of sleep. You know the feeling. The one where the edges of your thoughts start to soften and blur, and you are not quite here and not quite gone yet. You are in between, hovering in that warm, dark middle place where stories feel realer than they do in daylight. That is where this video lives. That is where we are going tonight. We are going to talk about Avatar. Not the action of it, not the fights, not the fire and the ice and the crashing earth. We are going to talk about the quiet questions underneath all of that. The theories that have lived in the margins of this show for 20 years, the ones that do not have clean answers, the ones that feel less like puzzles and more like doorways. And when you open them, the hallway goes on much longer than you expected. So get comfortable, let your body settle, let your breathing slow down. You do not need to remember everything that follows. You do not need to take notes. You just need to listen and let the world of Avatar fold around you the way it always has, gently, completely, like walking back into a place you have always known. These are the theories that change the shape of the show, the ones that make you look at a character differently after you hear them, the ones that make the world feel bigger, older, stranger, and somehow more true. Some of them are well supported by the evidence. Some of them exist in that beautiful gray space where the show never confirms or denies them, and they are richer for it. All of them deserve to be heard in the dark. At the end of the day, when your mind is finally quiet enough to really sit with them, we will cover 10 theories tonight. Each of them could hold an entire video on its own. But tonight we are going to move through them slowly, one at a time, the way you move through something in a dream, not rushing, not racing, just walking, steadily, through rooms you have not entered before, or rooms you thought you knew but that look different in this light, at this hour. The first theory is the oldest one, the one that begins at the beginning. Part 1. The theory that Aang never truly woke up. Close your eyes and picture the iceberg. You have seen it 100 times, and it is still one of the most arresting images in animation. A pillar of ice rising from the southern sea, glowing from within with a pale blue light. The glow is steady. It does not flicker. It has been glowing for 100 years. Inside it, a 12-year-old boy is suspended in the Avatar state, and the energy it takes to maintain that for a century is something the show never quantifies, but you can feel it in the light. When Katara and Sokka crack the ice open, the light stops. The Avatar state deactivates, and Aang opens his eyes and says, in the most disarming possible way, "I need to ask you something. Have you been practicing?" He wakes up, and the story begins. But what if it did not? This theory has existed since the early days of the fandom, and it is one of those ideas that the more you turn it over, the stranger and more interesting it becomes. The premise is simple on its surface. When Aang entered the iceberg, he was 12 years old, and running from the most frightening thing anyone had ever told him. He had just been informed that he was the Avatar. He had just learned that he was going to be taken away from Gyatso, the closest thing to a father he had ever known. He was terrified and overwhelmed and grieving before he had anything to grieve, and he ran. He rode Appa into a storm over the ocean, and in the middle of that storm, he went into the Avatar state, and the ice formed around him, and he sank. Now, the Avatar state is described throughout the show as a condition that activates during moments of extreme emotional distress or physical danger. It is, in the most basic sense, a survival mechanism. The accumulated wisdom and power of every Avatar who ever lived floods into the current Avatar's body to protect them. And it worked. It kept him alive for 100 years. The question the theory asks is whether alive is the same thing as awake. Think about what that means. 100 years is not a long nap. It is not the kind of sleep you surface from and feel oriented. 100 years is the lifetime of everyone you knew, concluded. The world Aang entered that iceberg knowing has ceased to exist. The language has shifted in small ways. The political geography has completely changed. The people he loved are all dead. His entire people are dead. And he pops out of the ice and asks if someone has been practicing their waterbending. The lightness of that response is what feeds the theory. It is either the most extraordinary resilience imaginable, or it is the emotional logic of someone who, on a very deep level, does not believe the time actually passed. There is a version of this theory that is more literal, and there is a version that is more philosophical, and both of them are worth sitting with. The literal version suggests that what the show presents as Aang's waking world is actually the extended dream of a traumatized child who never fully surfaces. That the friends he makes, the battles he fights, the growth he undergoes, all of it takes place in a mind that is still, somewhere beneath the ice, working through what it could not face. The world Aang inhabits in the show is coherent and detailed and real in every testable sense, but so are the most vivid dreams. And the most vivid dreams have rules. They have their own internal logic. They have consequences that feel real because the dreaming mind is producing them with the full weight of the unconscious behind them. This version of the theory is the one that requires the most suspension of disbelief, because it asks you to reread every scene in the show through the lens of wish fulfillment and psychological processing. It is not the version most fans hold to, but it is worth naming because the more psychologically grounded version of the theory is rooted in the same observation. Something about Aang's relationship to the events of the show suggests that he is not fully present in them. Not always, not uniformly, but in specific ways, at specific moments. You can feel the distance between him and the reality he is supposed to be inhabiting. The more philosophically grounded version of the theory does not argue that the show is literally a dream. It argues that Aang never fully escaped the psychological state that drove him into the ice in the first place. The fear that sent him fleeing, the terror of responsibility, the grief over what his role would cost him, those things do not disappear when he thaws. They go underground. They become his resistance to killing Ozai. They become his difficulty choosing the world over his personal relationships. They become every moment in the show where Aang reaches for the easier answer rather than the harder one, not because he is weak, but because some part of him is still that 12-year-old in the storm, and some part of him never stopped being in it. Psychologically, what Aang displays across 3 seasons maps onto what we might call a dissociative relationship with time and with his own history. He mourns the air nomads, yes, and that grief is enormous and carefully rendered. But the specific grief of losing 100 years of his own lived experience, the friendships he did not get to have, the things he did not get to learn and do and see, that particular grief almost never surfaces. He skips over it. He makes a joke about the century being a long nap and moves on. And you could read this as childlike resilience, which the show encourages you to do. Or you could read it as the emotional logic of someone who does not fully accept that the time passed. Someone who is, in a psychological sense, still standing in the corridor of the air temple saying goodbye to Gyatso, waiting for the conversation to continue from where it was interrupted. The detail that feeds this reading most directly is what the swamp shows him in Book 2. He and Katara and Sokka are pulled into the foggy swamp, and each of them sees a vision. Katara sees her dead mother. Sokka sees Yue, alive, before she is gone, and Aang sees a girl in a white dress who he does not recognize. A girl who turns out, 3 episodes later, to be Toph, a person he has not yet met. A person who does not exist yet in the version of his life that the swamp should have access to. The swamp benders describe the visions as images of people you have lost or people you love. They describe the swamp as a place where the root system connects everything, where the division between individual lives becomes permeable. But the theory asks, how does the swamp show Aang someone he has never met? If the vision is drawn from his unconscious, from something deep in him, then the theory becomes that Aang already knows Toph in some sense he cannot access consciously. That the avatar spirit within him, which carries the knowledge of past lives and possibly of future ones, has already made the connection. That the sleeping part of him, the part still in some sense under the ice, is dreaming her before she arrives. There is also the Cave of Two Lovers, a scene that is mostly remembered for the romance between Aang and Katara, but that contains a smaller detail worth pausing on. When the cave goes dark and the glowworms begin to light up, Aang is not afraid. He is present, comfortable in the dark in a way that someone who had spent 100 years in it might reasonably be, even if they did not consciously remember the time. And then there is the Book 2 finale, the crystal catacombs beneath Ba Sing Se. Azula hits Aang with a lightning strike that, by every indication the show provides, stops his heart. He dies. He is, in the precise technical sense, dead. And Katara revives him using water from the spirit oasis at the North Pole, the most sacred water in the world, the water that is directly connected to the moon and ocean spirits, water that is not simply water but spiritually charged in ways the show does not fully quantify. What does it mean to die and come back? What does it do to the layer of consciousness that was, in some sense, already suspended between living and not living? The show does not tell you directly. What it does is show you Aang after the revival. He is different. Quieter in certain moments, more certain in others. As if the experience of the other side, however brief, has cleared something in him that the 3 seasons of living in the waking world had not. The Book 3 Aang is more resolute than the Book 1 Aang. Not just because of natural character growth, but because something broke open in him in that cave and did not close the same way again. He enters Book 3 without the Avatar state, which is partly the consequence of his death and revival. And the process of reconnecting to the Avatar state in Book 3 is not simply a technical restoration. It is something more like a waking, a deeper waking. As if the first time he opened his eyes in the Southern Sea, in Katara's arms, he was only partly awake, and the second time, in the cave, after death and return, was more complete. The theory holds all of this loosely. It does not require you to accept that the show is literally a dream. What it asks is that you notice the places where Aang's presence in his own life is less than complete. Where he is, in the word its practitioners use, dissociated from the reality he is supposed to be inhabiting. And it asks you to trace those places back to their origin, to the storm, to the ice. To a 12-year-old who was so afraid of what waking up would cost him that part of him chose, at some level below conscious choice, to remain in the place between sleeping and waking just a little bit longer. The iceberg glows, steady and blue, in the dark water of the Southern Sea. Something is alive inside it. Something is dreaming. And when it finally opens its eyes, fully, the world is so changed from the one it left that the waking itself takes years. Drop a comment below telling me what time it is where you are and where you are watching from. I read every single one. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is a great time. It costs nothing, and it keeps these videos coming every week. Part 2, Iroh's Secret, the man who became something beyond human. There is a scene in the first season of Avatar that most people watch and immediately file away as a small character moment. Team Avatar is traveling through the Earth Kingdom. Aang has entered the spirit world and is riding on the back of Roku's dragon, Fang. The dragon and the boy pass through the sky above where Iroh and Zuko are standing with their Earth Kingdom captors. And Iroh looks up. He looks directly at the dragon and the boy, neither of whom are visible to any human in the physical world. And then, calmly, without explanation or apparent surprise, he uses the momentary distraction of the sight to slip a pin from his chains and attempt an escape. That is all the scene shows you. But the implication sits in the background of everything Iroh does for the rest of the series. He saw them. He saw 2 beings who were literally in another dimension, invisible to every other human character in the scene, and he saw them as clearly as if they were standing in front of him. This is not presented as remarkable. Iroh does not remark on it. He simply uses the information and moves on, and the show, in its characteristic restraint, does not explain it either. It simply files the moment away in the enormous drawer labeled Things About Iroh That Do Not Quite Add Up and continues. The question that follows Iroh through 3 seasons is the same question that follows every genuinely mysterious character in a great story. What do you actually know, and when did you know it? What are you doing while you appear to be doing nothing? And most essentially, how did you become this? Because Iroh is not simply a wise old man who drinks tea and tells Zuko cryptic things. Iroh is a man who can perceive the spirit world while standing in the physical one, which places him in a category of awareness that the show generally reserves for the Avatar. It makes him a category-breaking character, and category-breaking characters have origin stories worth investigating. The most well-supported theory, and the one closest to what the show's supplemental materials confirm, is that Iroh physically entered the spirit world after the death of his son, Lu Ten. The Avatar extras, the behind-the-scenes fact bubbles that aired alongside reruns of the show on Nickelodeon, explicitly state that there was a rumor Iroh entered the spirit world in an attempt to find Lu Ten. The Avatar Wiki describes a journey Iroh undertook after his son's death, one that led him into the spirit world and changed him in ways that the Fire Nation general he was before could never have predicted or prepared for. What do we actually know about what happened to Iroh between the lifting of the siege of Ba Sing Se and the beginning of the show? The show tells us he was once the most feared general in the Fire Nation, the Dragon of the West. The man who came closer to conquering Ba Sing Se than anyone before or since? He led a siege of that city for 600 days. By Fire Nation standards, this is legendary. By any military standard, it is extraordinary. He was, by every metric the Fire Nation recognized as meaningful, at the absolute peak of his power and his purpose. And then his son Lu Ten died in battle, and Iroh walked away. Not just from the siege, not just from the war. He walked away from the military, from the expectation that he would become Fire Lord after Azulon, from the entire infrastructure of his life as a conqueror. He disappeared into the world for years. When he surfaces again as Zuko's traveling companion and reluctant captain, he is something the Fire Nation has no category for. A retired general who does yoga, a former conqueror who obsesses over tea, a man who has surrendered every marker of military identity without apparent regret. The journey that produced this version of Iroh had to be extraordinary, not a comfortable retirement, not simply grief processed by time. Something happened to him that reshaped him at the level of his fundamental orientation toward existence. And the theory that has accumulated the most evidence over years of fan analysis is not just that he entered the spirit world. It is that he entered the spirit world and was changed by it in a way that most humans never are, and that most humans could not survive. Consider what grief like Iroh's would feel like to carry into a place where emotions become landscape. He lost Lu Ten. He lost his purpose. He lost the campaign he had devoted years to. He lost his claim to the throne. He lost the version of himself that had been building toward conquest for decades. He entered the spirit world with all of that inside him, and whatever the spirit world showed him in that state, whatever it reflected back, it must have been total, complete, a reckoning. The theory draws a meaningful parallel between Iroh and Yue, the princess of the Northern Water Tribe. Yue was born so near to death that the moon spirit breathed a portion of its own life into her to keep her alive. That spiritual energy became permanently part of who she was, expressed in her white hair, in her deep connection to the spiritual world, in the fact that when the time came, she could give that energy back and become the moon spirit herself. She was always partially something more than human, because something non-human had touched her at the root of her existence. The theory about Iroh draws a similar line. Not that he became a spirit in the same way Yue became the moon, but that during his time in the spirit world, searching for Lu Ten in grief that must have been beyond articulation, some exchange took place. Some portion of him stayed there, or some portion of that place came back with him. A changed permeability between himself and the spirit world. A connection that other humans do not have, that most humans could not achieve even intentionally. This is why he can see what others cannot. This is why certain spirits seem to recognize him, seem to afford him a respect they do not extend to other humans. This is why, by the time of the Legend of Korra, Iroh does not die in the conventional sense. In the Legend of Korra, when Korra encounters Iroh in the spirit world, she finds him exactly as you would expect to find him. Warm, unhurried, serving tea. Making tea, specifically, for anyone who passes through his corner of the spirit world, which suggests that he has set up a kind of permanent position there, a welcoming station, a place where lost spirits and confused humans can find a moment of calm before continuing. He is not surprised to be there. He is not disoriented. He does not seem homesick for the material world. He is, if anything, more settled in the spirit world than he ever appeared in the physical one, as if the physical world was always slightly the wrong fit, and this is the place he was always going to end up. He says something to Korra that is essential. He says that he always enjoyed the company of spirits. He says that when his work in the material world was finished, he chose to leave his body behind. He chose. The word is important. Most humans do not get to choose how they leave. The fact that Iroh did, and that the spirit world received him the way it received him, suggests that the relationship between him and that realm was different from the relationship most humans have, different enough that the rules which apply to everyone else did not quite apply to him. The tea theory, which is gentler and sweeter than the spirit world theory but connects to it, holds that Iroh's obsession with tea is a daily practice of the exact understanding he gained in the spirit world. In Chinese culture, tea is deeply linked to philosophy, to patience, to the appreciation of transient pleasures. Tea ceremony is a meditative act, and a proper cup of tea requires all four elements: fire to heat the water, water as the base, earth in the clay of the cup, and air to cool it before you drink. Iroh understands all four elements, not as a bender of all four, but as a philosopher of all four. He redirected lightning using water-bending principles he derived by studying waterbenders. He has spoken with understanding about earth-bending philosophy and air-bending philosophy in ways that go beyond what a firebender should know. T for Iroh is not a quirk. It is a practice. It is the physical, everyday expression of the understanding he came back from the spirit world carrying. That all four elements are present in every moment of ordinary life, that balance is not an achievement but a constant practice of attention and participation, that a cup of tea shared between enemies is a more powerful statement about the world than any military victory. You cannot win a war and end it. You can share tea and, for that moment, live in a world where the war does not exist. There is one more aspect of the Iroh theory that is rarely discussed, which is what it means for Zuko. If Iroh has the spiritual perception he appears to have, then his years of traveling with Zuko were not simply companionship or obligation. He could see, in a way that other humans could not, the trajectory of Zuko's spirit, where it was going, what it needed, the specific form of patience and love and strategic gentleness that would eventually allow Zuko to choose differently. He was not simply Zuko's uncle. He was a man who had been to the spirit world and back, who could see across the boundary between worlds, who had been changed by grief into something more than what he was, guiding a boy through the exact same process of loss and transformation that had produced him. The student and the teacher, separated by decades and a different kind of loss, but traveling the same road. The dragon of the West, the man with the tea. Looking up at spirits in the sky that no one else can see, and smiling to himself in the way of someone who has known for a long time that the world is larger than it appears. Part 3. The Ty Lee mystery air in her blood. There is a girl in Book 2 of Avatar who moves like weather. She cartwheels across rooftops as if the surfaces beneath her feet are merely suggestions. She vaults over earthbenders and water whips and fire blasts as if gravity is a guideline rather than a law. She strikes pressure points on people's bodies with a precision that temporarily paralyzes their limbs and prevents their ability to bend, and she does all of this with a smile that is so genuine it almost obscures how remarkable she actually is. Her name is Ty Lee, and she does not make sense. Not as a villain, not as a fighter, and not, most critically, as a person from the Fire Nation. She makes sense as a character. She is charming and three-dimensional and one of the show's most memorable secondary figures. But her existence, as a Fire Nation citizen with the skills she possesses and the appearance she has, raises a question the show never explicitly answers. A question that the fan community has been sitting with since 2006, turning it over in the way you turn over something that does not quite fit the pocket you are trying to put it in. Where did Ty Lee come from, really? The surface answer is that she is from a Fire Nation noble family, one of 7 identical sisters, who ran away to join a circus because the sameness of her siblings made her desperate for an identity of her own. And that is true. The show confirms it, and it is a genuinely touching backstory for what could have been a one-dimensional character. But here is what the show also shows you. Without drawing attention to it, without giving any character a line of dialogue that points at it directly. Ty Lee has gray eyes. Fire Nation characters have gold eyes. This is not incidental in Avatar. The show uses eye color to encode elemental affiliation with a consistency that is close to an absolute rule. Water Tribe characters have blue eyes. Earth Kingdom characters have green eyes. Fire Nation characters have gold. Air Nomads have gray. This system is applied across the entire cast, including mixed characters, including minor background characters, with a deliberateness that signals it is intentional and meaningful rather than aesthetic. It is a visual language the show chose and applies with care. Ty Lee has large, striking, unmistakably gray eyes. In a show where eye color is the visual alphabet of elemental identity, she has the eyes of a people who should be extinct. She also has brown hair rather than the jet black that appears almost universally among Fire Nation characters. This is a smaller detail, more easily explained away as artistic variety, but in context, paired with the eye color, it contributes to a profile that does not match the Fire Nation template. If you put Ty Lee next to any other Fire Nation character in the show, the difference is visible. She looks different. She looks like she comes from somewhere else, even if her life has been spent entirely inside Fire Nation borders. And then there is how she moves. Airbending is defined in the show's martial arts framework by evasion, by redirecting force rather than opposing it, by using the opponent's energy against them, by staying light on the feet, by prioritizing survival and non-confrontation over aggression. It is the most defensive of the four bending styles, built on a philosophy of coexistence rather than dominance. Ty Lee fights this way. She does not hit hard. She does not try to overpower anyone. She reads her opponent's movement, stays ahead of it, and targets the specific points in their body where she can create the most disruption with the least force. She also jumps in ways that no other Fire Nation character does. The height of her jumps, the lightness of her landings, the way she seems to briefly defy the downward pull of things, these are consistent observations for anyone who watches her fight scenes carefully. Other fighters in the show jump, but their jumps have weight. They push off hard and come down hard. Ty Lee's movement through the air has a quality that is harder to name than simply athletic. It resembles, more than anything else, the way Aang moves when he is using small, unconscious adjustments of air to make himself lighter. She does not have airbending, but she moves as if her body was designed to work with air rather than against it. The theory draws its strongest support from the origin of chi blocking itself. The Avatar Legends role-playing game materials, which are considered canon additions to the Avatar world, reveal that chi blocking did not originate with Ty Lee. It originated with a specific air nomad from the Western Air Temple named Ryoshan, who lived during Avatar Roku's era, the generation before Aang. Ryoshan was recognized as a skilled airbender with an unusual understanding of chi flow, and she taught chi blocking to Princess Zaisan, who was Fire Lord Sozin's own sister and who abdicated her royal titles to commit herself to air nomad philosophy and culture. The technique was, in its original form, an air nomad practice. It grows out of the air nomad understanding of chi pathways, which is the same understanding encoded in the blue arrow tattoos on Aang's body. The arrows trace the chi meridians through the human form. Airbenders, in their tradition, understand chi not as something fought over, but as something that flows and can be redirected. Chi blocking is the application of this philosophy to physical combat. Instead of using elemental force, you use precise knowledge of how a person's inner energy moves and you disrupt it. So how does a Fire Nation circus performer, living in an era when the air nomads are supposed to be entirely extinct, learn a technique that originated with air nomad practitioners? The most compelling answer is the simplest one. She was not, entirely, from the Fire Nation in the way the show presents her. The theory holds that Ty Lee is a descendant of air nomads who survived the genocide of Fire Lord Sozin's era. Not an airbender herself, because the ability to bend had been diluted or suppressed through generations of intermarriage and concealed identity, but a descendant. Someone in whom the genetics and the spiritual inclination of the air nomads lingered quietly, surfacing in her gray eyes and brown hair, and in an instinctive understanding of chi as something that flows rather than something that burns. The air nomads were nomadic, as their name states. They did not live exclusively in the four air temples. They traveled. They made connections and formed relationships across all four nations. They had friends and lovers and families in communities far from their own. When Sozin launched his attack using the power of the comet, he targeted the air temples. He went to the known locations. He destroyed what he could find. But the air nomads who were traveling at the time of the attack, who were visiting Earth Kingdom towns or water tribe settlements, or who had, over generations, built lives in places that were not the temples, were not all found, not immediately, possibly not ever. Hama is the proof of concept the show offers. A water tribe waterbender who was captured in a Fire Nation raid, who survived decades of imprisonment, who developed bloodbending in her captivity as a means of escape, and who emerged into the outside world with her identity intact and her abilities functioning. If a single waterbender could endure that much and survive, a family of air nomad descendants who quietly assimilated into Fire Nation society, kept their unusual appearance, kept certain cultural knowledge passed down in private, and simply outlasted the genocide by being invisible, is not only plausible but almost inevitable. There is a specific connective thread some fans have traced through a character named Kuzan. Aang mentions Kuzan in Book 1. He was Aang's friend from before the war, a Fire Nation boy who Aang knew and liked. The theory proposes that Kuzan, or someone in his family, sheltered air nomads during or after the genocide. That the connection between the air nomad tradition and this particular Fire Nation family went deep enough that air nomad knowledge, specifically the chi blocking technique that Ryoshan had developed, was preserved and passed down through generations, and that 100 years later, it surfaced in Tai Li as talent, as instinct, as a body that moves the way the air nomads taught. The Avatar Wiki notes plainly that there is no confirmed evidence that Tai Li has air nomad ancestry. The Wiki is correct. What the Wiki cannot explain, and what no source has ever explained, is why her eyes are gray. Eye color in Avatar is not a design choice made for aesthetics. It is a choice made for meaning. The eyes tell you where someone comes from. And Tai Li's eyes point at a people who are supposed to be gone. There is one additional detail that feeds the theory, and that is rarely discussed. Tai Li says she can see people's auras. She reads emotional energy as a visible quality around people's bodies, describing it in terms of color and intensity and quality of flow. No other Fire Nation character demonstrates this ability. No other Fire Nation character claims it. Aura reading, in the traditions that Avatar draws from, is associated with sensitivity to life energy, to chi, to the same invisible currents that both airbending and chi blocking operate upon. It is not a learned skill. It is a perception you either have or you do not. And Tai Li has it. And then there is the ending of her story. After she betrays Azula to save Mai at the Boiling Rock, she ends up imprisoned alongside the Kyoshi warriors. And she does not simply survive the imprisonment. She teaches them chi blocking. She passes the air nomad technique to a group of Earth Kingdom women who have dedicated their lives to preserving the memory and the methods of Avatar Kyoshi. And when she is released, she joins them. She adopts their uniform, their face paint, their way of traveling and fighting and being in the world. A girl from a Fire Nation noble family with gray eyes and air nomad movement patterns and a technique that traces back to the Western Air Temple ends up choosing to join the one group in the world that has the least connection to the Fire Nation. She moves toward the people who protect things, toward the tradition of preservation and skill without power. The Kyoshi warriors are not benders. They are, like Tai Li herself, people who figured out how to fight without elemental magic. She recognizes something in them. She fits. That is either a coincidence the show included without awareness of its implications, or it is the show quietly completing a story it never stated explicitly. A girl who did not quite belong to the Fire Nation, who always moved like something else, finding the people who are also something else, and choosing to stay. Part 4. Azula's Fire and the Psychology of Perfection. There is a scene near the end of Avatar that the show stages with extraordinary care and almost no dialogue. Azula is alone in a room. She has just become the Fire Lord, receiving her father's designation in absentia while Ozai goes to burn the world from the sky. She should be at the absolute peak of her power. She has everything she ever wanted. And she is standing in front of a mirror, and she is cutting her own hair with a pair of scissors, and it is going wrong. The hair falls unevenly. Her hands are shaking. She sees something in the mirror, a reflection of her mother, and the reflection speaks and Azula screams and the mirror shatters. This scene takes less than 3 minutes. It says everything the show has been building toward for 2.5 seasons, and it says it without anyone having to explain it. Azula's fire is blue. This is stated early in the show and then passed over, but it rewards attention. Blue fire burns hotter than orange fire. That is not a show invention. That is basic thermochemistry. Flame temperature determines color, and the hotter the combustion, the further the color moves toward blue. Orange and yellow flames, the fire you associate with ordinary burning, with campfires and candles and cooking, are the product of incomplete combustion. They are the visible evidence that the burning is not perfect. Blue flames represent more complete, more efficient, more precisely controlled combustion. The fuel and the oxygen are combining more fully. There is less waste. There is more heat per unit of fuel. The fire is doing what fire is supposed to do, more completely than ordinary fire can. When the show makes Azula's fire blue, it is encoding into the visual language of the animation something that never needs to be spoken. Her fire is more refined, more perfect, more completely controlled. She has taken the element that is supposed to be driven by emotion, by passion, by the inner fire that fuels aggression and ambition, and she has mastered it to the point where it barely resembles what the other firebenders produce. It is the same element, technically, but it looks completely different. It burns differently. It lands differently. And this is the paradox that the theory about Azula is built around. The coldest fire in the show is also the hottest. The most controlled is the most dangerous. She has done to her bending what she has done to herself. She has refined the outside to something approaching technical perfection, and in doing so, she has suppressed or destroyed something that fire is supposed to carry. Fire is alive, it moves, it responds. It is not a tool that can be held perfectly steady forever, and neither, the show demonstrates, is a person. The psychology that Azula displays has been studied extensively in the fan community, and the pattern that emerges from careful observation is one that the real world has clinical frameworks for. Though the show never uses clinical language, she shows traits consistent with narcissistic personality patterns, specifically grandiosity, a need for admiration, an inability to genuinely empathize with others except as instruments of her will, and a deep intolerance for perceived weakness or failure in herself or in those around her. She also shows traits consistent with borderline personality patterns, emotional volatility beneath the controlled surface, a terror of abandonment that she cannot acknowledge because acknowledging it would mean admitting she needs people, and an identity that is more brittle than it appears. These two patterns together create a specific kind of person, someone who has built their entire sense of self around being the best, not because they love the activities they excel at, but because excellence is the only proof they have that they deserve to exist. The framework is not unusual in people who grew up with conditional love, and Azula, if you watch carefully, grew up with exactly that. Ozai shaped her, not with the same visible cruelty he used on Zuko, the scorched face, the banishment, the explicit rejection. He shaped Azula with something more insidious and in some ways more damaging. With approval. He applauded her aggression. He smiled at her ruthlessness. He used her as the standard against which he measured Zuko and found him wanting. He gave her the specific reward of his attention and his pride whenever she performed perfectly, and he withheld it whenever she showed anything that looked like human limitation. What that does to a child, particularly a child with the intelligence and the sensitivity that Azula clearly possesses, is that it removes the safety to be imperfect. It removes the experience of being loved for what you are rather than for what you produce. Every moment of Azula's childhood that we see in the show, either directly or in flashback, is marked by performance. She is performing for her father. She is performing for the court. She is performing for her friends, who understand that friendship with Azula is contingent on continued usefulness. She has never, not once in the show, been in a situation where she felt safe enough to simply be. The moment that cracks this open is not the final Agni Kai, as devastating as that is. The crack begins at the boiling rock, when Mai defies Azula. When Mai, who has spent years allowing herself to be controlled by Azula's implicit threat of what happens to people who disappoint her, makes a different choice. She says, in one of the show's most significant lines, that she loves Zuko more than she fears Azula, and she means it, and Azula can feel that she means it. And the thing that falls away in that moment is not just a useful ally. It is Azula's proof that her method of relating to people works. Her method is control through fear. It is the only method she was ever given access to. She never learned how to make someone want to stay. She only learned how to make it dangerous for them to leave. And Mai chose to leave anyway, and absorbed the danger. And what that revealed to Azula is something she has no framework to process. That fear is not love. And that control is not loyalty, and that the relationships she has spent her life building are not relationships at all, but performances of relationship by people who are waiting for the first opportunity to run. Ty Lee's betrayal follows immediately. Two people, in the same moment. And Azula, who has no access to grief, who has no way to process loss except by converting it into anger or strategy, does what she has always done. She keeps going. She functions. She plans. She becomes the Fire Lord, and then she is alone in front of a mirror with scissors in her hands and her mother's face looking back at her from the glass. The vision of her mother is the show being explicit about something it has been showing you since Azula's first appearance. Ursa's departure did not hurt Azula less than it hurt Zuko. It hurt Azula differently, in a way that turned inward and calcified rather than exploding outward. Zuko carried his grief about his mother as a wound he acknowledged. He wanted to find her. He said so. He let the loss be visible. Azula denied that the loss was a wound. She told herself and anyone who observed her that she was never the kind of daughter Ursa liked anyway, that Ursa's love and concern were things she did not need, that the absence of them was not a deprivation but a simple fact about the world. And the mirror shows you in those final minutes of her arc that she has been lying to herself every day of her life. That the girl who hallucinated her mother's face in a reflection is not the terrifying princess the world has spent 3 seasons fearing. She is a child who was given weapons instead of love, and who spent her entire life trying to perform her way into a safety that was never going to come from the source she needed it from. The blue fire becomes erratic in the finale sequence. You can watch it happen, frame by frame, in her fight with Zuko. It flickers, it shifts between blue and orange. The color instability mirrors the psychological instability. The performance is collapsing. And what the theory holds is that the collapse is not the end of Azula's story, but the beginning of the only version of it that could ever have led somewhere real. Because you cannot build a self on perfection. Perfection is not a foundation. It is a pose held for too long, and eventually every pose breaks. In the graphic novel materials that follow the show's finale, Azula is institutionalized and eventually released into an uncertain freedom that does not look like redemption and is not meant to. It is something harder and less clean. The theory about her future holds that what she is moving toward is not the completion of Zuko's arc, not the tidy story of someone who chose wrong and then chose right and was welcomed back. It is something more like the story of someone learning, for the first time, what it might feel like to be a person rather than a performance of one. The coldest, hottest fire in the show, still burning, just differently now, in the aftermath of the mirror. Part 5, Zuko's redemption, what it actually cost. There is a moment in the 3rd season of Avatar that is easy to miss because the show frames it so quietly it barely registers as a moment at all. Zuko has just betrayed his uncle Iroh, choosing Azula and the Fire Nation and the hollow comfort of his old life over the chance at something genuinely different. He is back in the capital. His robes are Fire Nation red. His scar is present, but his bearing suggests he has found a way to stop seeing it, or at least to stop letting it speak. He is celebrated. He has his father's approval. Everything he spent 3 seasons pursuing has been delivered into his hands. And he is miserable, quietly, comprehensively, in the way that only a person who has finally gotten what they said they wanted and found it empty knows how to be. The show does not dramatize this. It does not give Zuko a scene where he sits in his lavish rooms and explains to the audience that what he has achieved is hollow. It simply shows you him moving through his restored life with the expressions of someone who has lost something important and lets you figure out what the lost thing was. The theory about Zuko that draws the deepest attention is not really a theory about his redemption arc, because the redemption arc is confirmed and explicit and beautifully constructed. The theory is about the cost of the redemption. The specific, named things that Zuko gave up for each of the choices he made, and whether the ending, as warm and genuinely earned as it is, fully accounts for the losses along the way. Zuko begins the show with a mission that his father gave him: capture the Avatar, and you can come home. This is presented as an honorable quest, and Zuko receives it as one. But what the show patiently constructs over 3 seasons is the revelation that the quest was never about honor at all. Honor was the word Ozai used because it was more dignified than the truth, which was that Zuko's mission was a punishment, a way of keeping him occupied and distant while making him feel responsible for his own exile. As long as Zuko was chasing the Avatar, he was too busy trying to earn his way back to question whether the terms were fair. In the 3rd season, there is a confrontation that the show frames as Zuko's most important single moment. It takes place during the solar eclipse in Ozai's underground bunker, when Zuko has finally decided to leave. He faces his father and he says the thing he has been unable to say for 3 seasons. He says he knows that Ozai banished him because Ozai wanted to, and that the mission was never really about honor, and that he is not coming back on Ozai's terms. He says in specific words that for so long all he wanted was Ozai's love and acceptance. He thought it was his honor he wanted. He knows now that those were 2 different things, and that he was chasing one as a substitute for the other. This speech is the structural culmination of Zuko's arc, but the theory asks you to look at what it cost everyone else to get him there. Iroh paid first and most. Iroh spent 3 seasons being patient and kind and honest with a nephew who kept choosing the wrong thing, and who ended the second season by betraying him so completely that Iroh spent months in a Fire Nation prison. He did not have to stay. He could have left at any point. He chose, with what must have been an extraordinary degree of long-term vision and what can only be described as love without condition, to remain in proximity to Zuko until Zuko was ready. And the cost of that choice was imprisonment, and the absence of everything that made Iroh's life pleasant, and the knowledge that the person he was waiting for might not choose correctly even then. Katara paid. She had substantial reasons not to trust Zuko, and all of them were legitimate. He had hunted her friends across 3 nations. He had sided with Azula in the catacombs. He had contributed by his choices to Aang's death. And when Zuko finally came to Team Avatar wanting to help, she was the one who said, plainly, what the rest of them were too polite or too hopeful to say, that she did not trust him, and that if he hurt Aang again, she would end his story herself. That is not a small thing to say. And then she had to live with the choice to let him stay anyway, and watch for signs that the trust was warranted, and give portions of it to him reluctantly as he proved the giving worthwhile. Toph paid, though she processes it differently. Her usual tactic of pretending not to care about things conceals a fairly thorough awareness of what the people around her are actually going through. She knew what letting Zuko into the group cost everyone. She adjusted. She paid attention even when she seemed not to. The academic analysis of Zuko's arc through Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which several researchers have applied in published analyses of the show, reveals something the show encodes intuitively without stating directly. Zuko's journey from banishment to redemption is a movement from the lower to the higher levels of human psychological need. He begins the show with his safety needs violently disrupted by his own father. He has no certainty, no belonging. He has only the mission his father gave him as a replacement for both. A project to keep him occupied and feeling purposeful while the 2 things he actually needs remain unavailable to him. Through the first 2 seasons, he operates at the level of survival and belonging. The quest for the Avatar is not about the Avatar, it is about getting back to a family, about proving he deserves a seat at a table that should never have required him to earn it. It is only in the 3rd season, when he has achieved the external goal and found it hollow, that he can move to the next level. The question is no longer, what do I need to be safe or to belong? The question becomes, who do I want to be? And that question is a luxury that only becomes available when the basic questions have been provisionally settled. Zuko's scene with his father during the eclipse is the moment the question is answered. He does not walk in with a plan. He walks in with clarity. The clarity that has been slowly assembling itself across 3 seasons of loss and growth and wrong choices and small corrections and the patient presence of his uncle. He tells Ozai that he is not going to play by the rules anymore, that he has figured out what honor actually is, and it does not come from Ozai, and it never did, and then he leaves. And Ozai tries to kill him, which is the most honest thing Ozai has ever done because the mask is finally off. What the theory emphasizes is that this clarity did not come free. It was paid for by years of suffering, and by the suffering of everyone around Zuko who chose to stay close enough to help him find it. Redemption is written in stories as a journey the redeemed person takes, with the other characters functioning as scenery or obstacles or supporting roles. The theory about what Zuko's redemption actually cost asks you to remember that the other characters were not scenery. They were people. They had things they gave up or risks they took to make space for Zuko's journey. And the show, to its credit, does not pretend those contributions were small or cost-free. The quiet moment at the end of Zuko's arc, his coronation, his acceptance of the Fire Lord's seat, the image of him standing alongside the people who helped him get there, is a moment the show earns, because it has shown you every step of the road, every wrong turn and every small correction, every time someone chose to keep faith with him when the evidence of faith being warranted was still thin. He does not say honor much anymore. The word that was his most repeated utterance in Book 1 has faded from his vocabulary by the time the show ends. Not because he no longer cares about the concept, but because the concept has become so integrated into who he is that he no longer needs to name it. He has stopped chasing honor because he has found it in the specific form it actually takes, doing the right thing, consistently, in the direction of the person he decided to become. That is what it cost. And that is what it bought. Part 6. The lion turtles and the hidden origin of all bending. There is a moment in the finale of Avatar that confused a significant portion of the audience when it first aired, and the confusion was not born of inattention. It was born of the show doing something genuinely bold, reaching back to the very beginning of its own mythology and revealing that the foundation was different from what anyone had assumed. Aang is meditating on a floating island. The island is, as becomes apparent, not an island at all. It is a living creature so old that the centuries do not seem to register against its vast indifference to time. It has the face of a lion. It has the shell of a turtle. Its eyes have seen the world before the four nations existed, before the Avatar cycle began, before human civilization had organized itself around elements at all. And it gives Aang something, not advice, not encouragement, something older and more fundamental. It gives him energy bending. The immediate fan reaction split between awe and suspicion. Where did this come from? Was it planned? Or was it an invention, a deus ex machina pulled from somewhere outside the show's established mythology to solve a problem the writers had written themselves into, specifically the problem of how Aang was going to defeat Ozai without killing him? The answer is that it was planned. Not every detail of it, but the lion turtles and their connection to bending, and their specific role as the origin point of humanity's relationship to elemental manipulation, were in the world of Avatar from the beginning, waiting for the narrative to reach the moment when they were needed. The legend of Korra eventually fills in the origin story that Avatar leaves gestured at but unexplained. In the era before the Avatar cycle, before Avatar 1 became the first Avatar, humans did not live on the ground. They lived on the backs of lion turtles, colossal living islands whose size made them equivalent to small cities. Each lion turtle had an affinity for one of the four elements, and the settlements on their backs were organized around those affinities. When humans left the turtles back to hunt in the spirit wilds, the lion turtle would grant them temporary control over that element for protection. When the humans returned home, they gave the ability back. This is the origin of bending, not the animals. Not the dragons or the badger moles or the sky bison or the moon, though those creatures are the origin of specific techniques and traditions within each bending style. The original gift, the first moment of human elemental manipulation, came from the lion turtles through a technique even older than the elements: energy bending. The lion turtles did not bend fire or water or earth or air directly. They bent the energy within people and in doing so transferred the capacity to interact with those elements. This means that everything the Avatar world believes about the origin of bending, the stories of learning from animals, the cultural myths each nation carries about how their element came to them, those stories are not wrong, but they are incomplete. They tell you how bending was learned and refined and passed down through generations. They do not tell you where the capacity for it came from in the first place. The capacity came from the oldest living things in the world, who remembered the original exchange and were available for it when the moment required it. The foreshadowing of the lion turtles is one of the show's most patient long games. In Book 2, in the library, there is a brief shot of a scroll depicting a lion turtle, one frame. Easy to miss, and most viewers do miss it. In Book 3, during the day of the solar eclipse, in the Fire Nation's underground bunker, a carving of a lion turtle is visible on a wall. These appearances are confirmed by the creators as intentional. They are the show placing the answer in the background of earlier episodes, banking on the fact that most viewers will not see it, and making a quiet gift to those who look carefully. The lion turtle in the finale does not seem surprised by Aang. It does not seem to be encountering the Avatar accidentally. It is, in the way of genuinely ancient things, doing something it has been waiting to do. And what it tells Aang is essential: that energy bending is not a technique that can be learned through practice or study. It is a capacity that requires a specific quality of character. The spirit of the person using it must be, in the lion turtle's own word, unbendable. Not strong, unbendable. There is a difference. Strong means able to withstand force. Unbendable means incapable of being altered by what it encounters, a spirit that will remain itself regardless of what the other person's energy pushes against it. This is why Aang was the Avatar who could do what needed to be done without killing. Not because he was the most powerful, not because he was the best bender, but because his spirit, with all its fear and lightness and desperate wish that things could be resolved without the worst kind of cost, was genuinely unbendable in the way the technique required. He was too committed to his own values to be corrupted by Ozai's energy, even in direct contact with it. The very thing that made him seem inadequate as a warrior, his refusal to accept that killing was necessary, was exactly the quality that made energy bending available to him. The theory extends from this to a question about the lion turtles themselves. How many were there? The legend of Korra implies that only one survived into Aang's era. What happened to the others? The most straightforward answer is that they simply died out over thousands of years, as the world changed and the role they had played was transferred to the Avatar. But the theory holds that the specific survival of the one who appeared in the finale is not accidental, that this particular lion turtle, or some intelligence within it, was waiting, not for Aang specifically, but for the Avatar who would arrive at the specific moment the show depicts, who would need the specific thing the lion turtle had to offer. The lion turtle is the show's oldest character, older than any spirit, older than the Avatar cycle, older than the four nations. It is, in some sense, the memory of how the world was before it became what it is. And in the final hours before the world changes again, it passes that memory to the boy who is about to determine what the world becomes next. When the lion turtle speaks, it does not tell Aang what to do. It gives him the capacity to make a choice that the situation would otherwise have foreclosed. And then it lets him make it. That is the nature of the gift, not an answer, but the possibility of an answer that would not otherwise exist. The lotus carved into the scroll in the library, the stone face on the bunker wall, the floating island that turns when Aang reaches the edge of it. The show placed its oldest secret in the background of its earliest episodes, and then walked Aang toward it for 3 seasons, without either of them knowing that was the direction they were going. Part 7. The Spirit World's Hidden Rules. The Spirit World in Avatar is one of the most beautifully realized pieces of fantasy world-building in any animated series. It is not simply the normal world made strange, not a parallel dimension that operates by slightly different physics. It operates on completely different principles. Emotions become landscape. Time folds. The self becomes visible in a way the physical world does not allow. Spirits have their own motivations, their own histories, their own relationships with humanity that stretch back to before any specific human being was born. The Avatar can enter it through meditation, or through death, or through certain liminal conditions when the boundary grows permeable, and what they find there is always both more and less than they expected. More strange, less predictable, and somehow, always, personally relevant in a way that feels less like coincidence and more like the world responding to the specific person who entered it. The spirit world has rules. The show never lists them. It demonstrates them with enough consistency that if you pay close attention, you can reconstruct them by observation. And the reconstruction reveals a system that is stranger and more internally consistent than most viewers notice. The first rule is that the spirit world reflects whoever is inside it. This is stated outright in the Legend of Korra, when Iroh tells Korra that her emotions become reality in the spirit world, especially for the Avatar. The sky darkens when she is distressed. The spirits grow restless when she is angry. The landscape responds to her internal state with a directness that the physical world does not permit. This makes the spirit world, paradoxically, one of the most honest environments in the Avatar universe. You cannot perform calm when you are afraid. You cannot maintain a public face. The world around you will show the truth of what is actually happening inside you, whether or not you are ready for it to be visible. The theory extends this rule beyond Korra's era, asking whether this principle was always operating, even in Aang's time. When Aang enters the spirit world to speak with Avatar Roku during the winter solstice, the environment around them is the ruins of Roku's temple, the place where Roku's physical life ended. The setting is not neutral. It is emotionally freighted. And the question the theory raises is whether the temple appears in the spirit world because it is somehow preserved there, or because it is the place that carries the most psychological weight for Roku, the place where his story ended, and therefore the place where his spirit presence is most concentrated. If the spirit world is responsive to the inner states of the beings within it, then every spirit has a territory that corresponds to their nature, their history, their emotional gravity. Ko the Face Stealer lives in a dark and tangled place that matches exactly what he is. Wan Shi Tong's library is organized and vast and slightly forbidding, matching the spirit's relationship to knowledge. possessive and comprehensive, and deeply suspicious of the uses other beings might make of what it contains. The spirit world is not a place people visit. It is a place that reveals. The second rule is that the spirit world has a complex and not fully understood relationship with time. In the physical world, time moves forward in one direction. The past is gone and the future has not happened. In the spirit world, these distinctions are less stable. When Aang communicates with Avatar Roku during the winter solstice, he is not accessing a recording. He is communicating with a presence that can think and respond and make decisions. The past avatars exist in the spirit world not as memories but as continuing presences, capable of action, capable of being wrong, capable of having conversations that affect events in the present. Roku made mistakes in his past presence that affected Aang's present. He was too lenient with Sozin when Sozin began establishing Fire Nation colonies in other nations' territories. He confronted him and destroyed his palace and let him go, because they had been friends and because he trusted that the friendship was still real. And the consequence of that trust was the 100-Year War. The past avatar made an error in judgment that the present avatar inherited. Under a straightforward understanding of time, this should be impossible. The past is fixed, but the spirit world does not honor that fixity. The avatar state, seen through this lens, is a temporal experience as well as a power enhancement. When the avatar state activates and all the past lives flood into the present avatar's body, that is a compression of centuries into one person in one moment. The avatar in that state is not fully present in the moment. They are, in some sense, in multiple moments simultaneously, which is partly what makes the state so powerful and so dangerous. Too much time in one place. Too many versions of experience without the linear threading that allows a single person to hold them all without being overwhelmed. The third rule is about what the spirit world holds. The theory draws from several pieces of evidence across both shows and the supplemental materials to propose that the spirit world is the place where things that have ended in the physical world continue in a different form. Lu Ten is somewhere in the spirit world. Roku is there. Every previous avatar is there, or accessible from there. Yue is there, as the moon, in a form that is neither quite the person she was nor quite gone from the person she was. The spirit world is not death, or not only death. It is persistence, the ongoing presence of things that the physical world has released. And what can be reached from the spirit world, by those who know how, are the memories and the wisdom and the accumulated experience of everyone who has ever gone there. This is why the avatar cycle is so powerful. Not because any single avatar is extraordinary, though they often are, but because every avatar is connected, through the spirit world, to the long chain of everyone who held the role before. The avatar is not a person. The avatar is a role occupied by persons with access to all the previous occupants. Ko, the face stealer, is the spirit world's most vivid illustration of the third rule. He collects faces. He has done it for 10,000 years. The faces he has taken are preserved in the spirit world, in his domain, unable to move on. They are there. And the theory about Ko's collection is that what he takes is not simply expression, but identity. The face, in many cultural traditions that Avatar draws from, is the visible manifestation of the inner self. To steal a face is to steal the ability to present a self to the world. And Ko holds those stolen selves, in his domain, as what? Trophies? Or something more complicated? The show never resolves this. The fourth rule is about access. Not everyone can enter the spirit world, and not everyone who can enter can do it safely. Aang can enter through meditation. The Avatar's natural connection to the spirit world makes the crossing possible. Non-avatars require special conditions, specific liminal moments, or in Iroh's case, a depth of spiritual connection that most humans never develop. The spirit world is not sealed from the physical world. It is merely separated from it under ordinary conditions, and the separation becomes permeable when the conditions become extraordinary. Harmonic convergence, when it occurs in the Legend of Korra, makes the separation permeable for everyone. The portals open, and for a period, humans and spirits move between worlds with relative ease. And what the Legend of Korra shows you in that period is something Avatar only hinted at, that the two worlds are more similar than they appear, that the spirit world is not elsewhere, it is adjacent. It has always been there, on the other side of a membrane that most people never become still enough or attentive enough or broken open enough to feel. Part 8, Sokka, the Moon, and the Space Sword Theory. Let the night get very quiet for a moment. This one is the gentlest theory, the one that lives in the softest part of the show. Let it land the way it wants to. Sokka's story in Avatar is the story of a person who grows up without magic in a world that runs entirely on it. He is surrounded by benders from the first episode. His sister, his traveling companions, his enemies, his allies, nearly every person who matters in the story he is part of bends an element, and he does not. He carries a boomerang. He makes jokes. He draws maps in the margins of conversations that other people are having about their abilities. He stays up late thinking through problems that the benders in his group can sometimes solve by simply pointing at something. It would be easy to read him as the comic relief character, and the show invites that reading in its early episodes. He is funny. He makes the wrong call at the wrong time and falls into things. He is visibly afraid in moments that the other characters pass through without obvious difficulty. He is ordinary in a world that rewards the exceptional, and in the first part of the show, the ordinariness is played primarily for laughs, and then the stakes change, and Sokka changes with them. By the third season, Sokka has become the group's mind. Not simply its strategist, though he is that. He has become the person who holds the group together by being the one among them who understands what things cost. He watches Aang and sees that Aang is carrying a weight that no 12-year-old should ever have to carry, and he adjusts how he approaches Aang accordingly. He watches Katara and understands when she needs to be challenged, and when she needs to be steadied. He watches Toph and understands that her certainty is also her armor, and that the armor needs to come down sometimes for the person inside it to breathe. He does all of this without being told to, without the direction of a bending teacher or a spiritual guide. He does it by paying attention. He also has, by the third season, a sword made of metal from space. The meteor falls at the beginning of Book 3. Sokka sees it. He goes to find where it landed, and he finds it, and he makes the journey to Piandao, a master swordmaker who is also, it turns out, a member of the Order of the White Lotus, to forge the meteorite into something he can use. The resulting sword is black, unlike any other weapon in the show, because the metal from which it is made has never been part of the earth. It fell from somewhere outside the world's ordinary systems. It does not share the origin of anything else Sokka owns. The theory about the sword begins with Yue. Yue became the moon at the end of Book 1. This is one of the show's most emotionally devastating moments. The sacrifice of a person who did not have to make the sacrifice but who understood that she was the only one who could. She gave back the life the moon spirit had given her as an infant, and in giving it back, she merged with the spirit and became the physical form of the moon in the world. She is not exactly the moon. She is the moon spirit, Tui, inhabiting the moon as its physical expression. But she is there. She is conscious. She is present in a way that a person who has merely died is not. After her death and transformation, the show gives you one quiet image. Sokka, looking up at the moon, and Yue's voice, heard only by the audience and perhaps not even by Sokka, saying something that is not quite goodbye. The theory holds that the meteor was Yue. Not that she physically manufactured and launched a rock from space, which would obviously be beyond whatever the moon spirit can do, but that she, existing now as a cosmic body with some influence over the physical world and a particular love for the specific person who is still alive below, found a way to direct something toward him, to send him a resource that the ordinary world would not have provided, something he could use. Something that would make him a little less vulnerable in a world that keeps asking him to fight without the gifts it gave everyone else. The timing feeds the theory. Sokka, at the beginning of Book 3, is at the lowest point of his arc. The group has just escaped the fall of Ba Sing Se. They have lost. Aang is in a strange, suspended state from his death and revival. The world feels lost. And Sokka, who has never had bending and never will, is sitting with the knowledge that the war is entering its final stage, and his contributions have been, by any conventional measure, the smallest. The meteor falls then. It falls where he can find it. It falls in a form that a clever person with access to the right teacher can make into something useful. If you are willing to extend the principle that this world does not have accidents, that the moon spirit is both conscious and capable of care, and that care for a specific person is not beyond what a spirit of her nature might express, then the meteor is a gift. A practical, elegant, unsentimental gift, which is exactly the kind of gift Yue would give to Sokka. Not flowers, not a vision, a piece of the sky that he can hold in his hands and use. The sword is eventually lost. Sokka drops it during the final aerial battle above Ozai's burning fleet. It falls into the ocean somewhere below, and the show does not stop for this. It does not ask you to mourn it. It simply allows it to happen, and the loss is quiet, the way the loss of a thing from the sky that returns to the sea might be quiet. What the space sword theory adds to Sokka's character is something that the show gives him in a slightly different register. It says that even the ordinary person, the one without magic, is seen. That the people who love us find ways to help us that do not require them to be present in the conventional sense. That a girl who became the moon looked down at the person she had loved and sent him something from the sky, as simply and as practically as love sometimes operates when it has been translated into something larger than the human form it started in. He looked up at the moon for the rest of his life. The show does not tell you this, but it seems likely. Part 9 Gyatso's Last Stand. What really happened in that room. There is a scene in Book 1 of Avatar that the show approaches with something close to reverence. Aang arrives at the Southern Air Temple, his home, and it is silent. He calls out names. No one answers. He moves through familiar spaces that shaped him and that are now wrong, in a way he cannot initially name. Empty in the way that living places should not be empty. Quiet in a register that is different from ordinary quiet. He finds the courtyard where he played airball with his teacher, Monk Gyatso. And in the courtyard, he finds what is left of Gyatso. Around that skeleton, in a circle, arranged with the terrible specificity of something that ended rather than simply stopped, are the skeletons of Fire Nation soldiers. The room shows no burn marks. The fire did not do this. Whatever killed those soldiers was not fire, and whatever Gyatso did, he did before the Fire Nation soldiers could use their element. Because if they had been able to use it, the room would tell you so. Firebenders kill with fire. They do not suppress it out of mercy or aesthetics. If Gyatso had simply been overwhelmed in a conventional fight, the walls would carry the evidence. They do not. Aang cannot hold the weight of what he is seeing. The avatar state activates, fueled by grief beyond the capacity of a 12-year-old body to contain, and for a moment Aang becomes something larger and more dangerous than himself, and the mountain shakes. Katara reaches him. She holds him. Gradually the state releases. He comes back to himself, and the show moves forward, because the show is always moving forward, and the room and its unanswered question are left behind. The theory about what happened in that room is the one that requires the least speculation and produces the most feeling. It is almost not a theory at all. It is a close reading of evidence. And the evidence points in one direction. Gyatso removed the air from the room. Airbending, in the show's martial arts framework, is the defensive element. It is associated with evasion and redirection and the principle of nonviolence. Airbenders do not generally kill. Their philosophy discourages it. Their fighting style is built to incapacitate and escape rather than to destroy. But airbending is also the manipulation of air, the element that every living thing requires. And the absolute control of that element in an enclosed space creates a possibility that the philosophy of nonviolence would only permit in the most extreme circumstances. Gyatso sealed himself and the Fire Nation soldiers into a space without breathable air. No oxygen means no fire. Fire Nation soldiers, without their element, are formidable fighters but mortal ones. And without air, everyone in the room is mortal equally. Gyatso chose to die in the same way he killed the people who came for him, with the element. With the element turned inward, turned to silence, turned to stillness. The confirmation that this technique exists comes through Zahir in The Legend of Korra. Zahir, who achieves airbending after harmonic convergence and who studies air nomad philosophy and history with what can only be described as devotion, uses the removal of air from a sealed space to kill the Earth Queen in one of the show's most disturbing moments. He learned the technique from the historical records of the air nomads, the records that survived the genocide, scattered and incomplete, that the air acolytes preserved and that Zahir accessed in his obsessive study of the tradition. It is not an invented technique. It is not something Zahir discovered. It is something the air nomads knew, which means Gyatso knew it. He was one of the most accomplished airbenders of his generation. The show tells you this through the respect other characters show him, through the fact that the Council of Monks listened to him, through the intimacy with which Aang describes his mastery. He was not young. He was not unprepared. He had spent decades with this element. He understood it at a level that most airbenders would never reach. When the soldiers came, with the power of Sozin's comet amplifying every Fire Nation bender in the world, Gyatso understood the calculus. The comet makes firebending stronger. It does not make the need for air less essential. It does not change the basic biological reality that everyone in the room, including the soldiers whose fire would have been at its most devastating, needed to breathe. He sealed the room. He used the element he had spent his life honoring in its most absolute and most final application. And he died in the silence he created, surrounded by the people who thought they had come to take his life and found, instead, that he had already decided the terms. The emotional weight of this theory lands on Aang in ways Aang never gets to consciously process. He never knows the details of what happened in that courtyard. He sees the result but not the action. He sees that Gyatso was there and is gone, and that the Fire Nation soldiers are also gone, but the how of it is beyond what the scene shows him, and so he carries it as a mystery, a loss that cannot be fully understood. But the theory holds that what Gyatso did in that room was, in its own devastating way, an act of love. He did not simply defend himself. He took with him the people who destroyed his world, his students, his community, the boy he loved who had already left and who he understood, in the quiet of whatever remained to him in those final hours, was not coming back. He did it with the element they had shared. He did it completely. And then the room was still, and the mountain was still, and 100 years passed. What the theory does to Gyatso is the same thing it does to every person in the Avatar universe, who the show barely allows you to see but who turns out to contain an entire story. It makes him three-dimensional. Not the gentle, laughing teacher of the flashbacks, though he was that. Also the man who chose, when choosing was necessary, how to end his story. Not as a victim. As an airbender, in the fullest possible sense of what that meant. Part 10, the Avatar Cycle's deepest secret: what comes after Korra. This is the one that lives farthest out in the dark. The theory at the edge of what the show can tell you, where speculation and implication blend into something that has no clear boundary. It is about the Avatar Cycle itself, about what it means that Korra broke it, about what an avatar is supposed to be when the world it was built for has fundamentally changed. In The Legend of Korra, at the end of Book 2, Korra defeats Unalaq in a confrontation that also destroys Vatu, the spirit of darkness who has been seeking release since the beginning of time. This would be a clean victory under ordinary circumstances. But Unalaq, fused with Vatu's power, destroys Rava during the struggle. Rava is the spirit of light, and Rava is also something more specific and essential. Rava is the vessel through which the Avatar spirit carries its past lives. She is the thread that connects every avatar to every avatar who came before. She is the continuity. When Rava is destroyed, Korra loses her connection to every previous avatar. Aang is gone, Roku is gone, Kyoshi is gone. The 10,000 years of accumulated avatar wisdom, all of it, erased from Korra's access. Rava is eventually reborn, because Rava and Vatu are each other's eternal counterparts, and neither can be permanently destroyed. But what is not reborn with Rava is the connection to the past. Korra merges with a Rava who does not carry the past lives any longer. She is the Avatar, but she is the Avatar who begins again, the first of a new chain. The theory begins with a simple question. What does this mean for the next Avatar? Under the traditional Avatar cycle, the next Avatar after Korra would have been born in the Earth Kingdom. The cycle moves through nations in a specific sequence, and Earth follows Korra's water tribe. That child, wherever they are, has inherited the role of the Avatar. But they have not inherited what every previous Avatar inherited, the accumulated connection to thousands of years of past avatars, the voices and visions and counsel of people who lived the role before and who can speak from inside the person to guide them through its demands. They are starting from zero, or as close to zero as a person can get, while still being connected to the Avatar spirit through Rava. The theory's first arm explores what this means practically. The past lives were not decorative. They were not simply a source of power, though they were that in the avatar state. They were also a source of moral accountability. Roku could tell Aang where he went wrong. Aang, when Korra began to lose her way, could push back from inside her. The accumulated wisdom of the past avatars served as a kind of internal parliament, a continuous check on the current avatar's decisions by people who had made their own decisions and lived with the consequences and could speak from that knowledge. The next avatar has no such check. They must develop their own moral framework from scratch, in real time, in a world that is more complicated than any world the avatar cycle has operated in before. The spirit portals are open. The two worlds are merging. The Fire Nation's imperialism has been ended but not erased. The Earth Kingdom, as the legend of Korra demonstrates, is deeply unstable in the aftermath of a century of war and its long rebuilding. The Industrial Revolution is changing the material conditions of every nation, and the role of the Avatar, which was defined for a world where the spirit world and the human world were separated, is in the process of becoming something that no previous Avatar and no current tradition has defined yet. The theory's second arm is more hopeful. It suggests that the breaking of the chain was not a catastrophe but an evolution. That the Avatar cycle, as it existed for 10,000 years, was designed for a specific problem: the sealing of Vatu, the maintenance of the separation between worlds, the balance between a human realm and a spirit realm that were fundamentally understood as different things that needed mediation. Korra resolved the original problem in a different way. She defeated Vatu. She opened the portals. She changed the fundamental structure of the problem. And the avatar who comes after her is the first avatar born into the solution rather than the problem. The first avatar who does not have to maintain a balance between separated worlds because the worlds are no longer separated in the same way. The first avatar whose role has to be invented from the ground up because the job description that defined every previous avatar no longer applies cleanly to the reality they inhabit. There is something lonely and something wonderful about this. Lonely because the chain is broken, and the next avatar faces their role without the counsel of everyone who held it before. Wonderful because the next avatar is, in some meaningful sense, the freest avatar in history, not constrained by tradition, not guided by accumulated expectations, not carrying 10,000 years of precedent that must be honored or carefully departed from. Just a person, a child, born into an extraordinary role in a world that is learning to be something it has never been before, figuring out what that role means in real time. Avatar 1, the first avatar, had to figure it out too. He was a human thief who accidentally freed a spirit that should have stayed contained, who then spent the rest of his life trying to repair the damage, who merged with Rava to have the power to seal Vatu during harmonic convergence, and who became the avatar entirely unprepared for the role it would ask him to play. He improvised, he made mistakes, he did the best he could with the situation as he found it, and what he built from those improvised choices lasted 10,000 years. The next avatar after Korra is in a similar position, different context, different world. No past lives to consult. But the same fundamental situation, a person who has been given a role that is larger than any one person, in a moment of historical change that the role's tradition has no precedent for, who has to decide what the role means now that the circumstances that defined it have shifted. The theory does not say what that avatar will do. It cannot. The story is not yet written, and if it is ever written, it will be written by the avatar themselves, in the choices they make in the world they inherit. What the theory says is that the breaking of the chain was not the end of the avatar cycle. It was the end of one version of it. And something new, something that has no name yet because the name will be given by whoever lives it, is beginning. The fire went out, and something else is being lit from the embers. In a world where the sky and the spirit world and the ocean and the earth are all slowly learning to share the space they once divided. 10 theories. 10 windows into a world that has spent 20 years being more than it appears. None of them are the final word. The show is built for exactly these kinds of questions, built to leave enough room that the questions can live inside it comfortably for decades without becoming cramped. What you have been listening to tonight is not a set of answers. It is a walk through a world that was loved into existence by people who believed that caring about the details was the same thing as caring about the audience. That the things you do not see are as important as the things you do. That the invisible architecture is what holds the visible world together. Let the theory settle now, the way everything settles at this hour. Gently, into the corners of things. Let the images come if they come. Aang in the ice, the blue light steady in the dark water. Iroh looking up at a dragon in a sky that no one else sees. Ty Lee moving through the air as if she was born for it. Gray eyes open, lighter than anyone around her. Azula's fire flickering, just once, from blue toward orange. Zuko standing in a bunker with his hands still and his voice finally steady. The lion turtle opening its vast and patient eyes. A meteor falling through dark sky from a moon that loved someone. A clean room in a silent temple. A child, somewhere, being born into a world that does not yet know what to call the thing they are going to become. The world of Avatar does not change while you are away from it. It waits, the way good worlds wait, with more rooms than any one visit can find. With things you have not noticed yet in episodes you have watched 20 times, with old creatures who remember more than they say, and young ones who will grow into more than they know. Sleep well. The spirit world is adjacent to where you are right now, just past the edge of the dark behind your eyes. And somewhere in the calm between one breath and the next, a 12-year-old boy is riding a flying bison through a sky full of clouds, and everything is still possible, and the world is very large, and there is time. There is time. If this helped you sleep or just kept you good company tonight, a like means a lot, and subscribing keeps these videos coming. Share it with someone who needs a long, quiet story to fall asleep to. The next one is already being built, and there is always more of this world left to find. Script by Bald Head Lore. Appendix The Deeper Layers. 5 more theories worth sitting with. The 10 theories above are the architecture. But in a world as carefully built as Avatar, the architecture always has more rooms than the main hallway can show you. These are the ones that live in the side corridors. The ones that are smaller but no less interesting. The ones that fit best at the end of a long night, when you are nearly gone and the thoughts are light and easy. The theory of what Sokka carried after Yue. Sokka is, in the fan community's long-running and often very funny conversation about him, the character people spend years underestimating. And then they rewatch the show as adults, and something shifts. And they realize that Sokka was always the one they should have been paying the most attention to. Here is what the theory holds that the show leaves in the space between scenes. Sokka's relationship with Yue does not end when she becomes the moon. It enters a different phase. And that different phase is not grief, exactly, or not only grief. It is the specific experience of loving someone who is still present, but unreachable in the ways presence usually works. She is there every night. He can look at her. He can, if he is the kind of person who talks to the sky when no one is watching, talk to her. But she cannot answer in the way a person answers. She answers in the way the moon answers, which is by being there, constant, cycling through her phases, pulling on the tides. The theory suggests that this experience, this specific form of love that has nowhere to go except upward, is what gives Sokka his particular quality of acceptance about loss. He loses things throughout the show. He loses his father to the war, temporally. He loses Yue, he loses his sword. He loses the boomerang, though it always comes back. He has a relationship with impermanence that is more developed than the other characters, not because he is naturally philosophical about it, but because he has had to live with the most specific possible example of it. He loved a girl who became the moon, and loving her still, after she became that, required him to develop a form of attachment that could survive transformation, that could hold someone even when the holding was entirely on one side, that could continue without reassurance or reciprocity, or any of the ordinary things that love asks for in order to sustain itself. This is the thing that makes Sokka able to be the group's steadying force. Not his planning skills, though those are considerable, not his humor, though it is essential, but his particular educated relationship with impermanence. He has already done the hardest thing. He has already loved someone across the distance of them becoming something else. Everything after that is, in some way, practice. When Suki comes back into his life, the theory holds that the relationship is possible because of what Yue taught him. He had to learn to hold someone without clinging, to care without demanding that the caring be returned in kind, to accept that the people you love will sometimes become things you cannot fully follow. Yue taught him all of this. And Suki is the person he gets to practice it with in the ordinary human way. with someone who is present and reachable and who does not need to be the moon in order to stay. The boomerang always comes back. He says this, and the show makes it a joke, but the joke is about more than the boomerang. It is about Sokka's relationship to all the things he throws into the world and watches arc away. They come back, sometimes in the same form, sometimes in a different one, sometimes, as with Yue, as part of the sky, but they come back. The theory of Ba Sing Se's true architecture. Ba Sing Se is the largest city in the Avatar world, and the show presents it with a social stratification so deliberate and so clearly mapped onto real history that it could function as a standalone essay about urban power structures. The city has 3 rings: an outer ring that houses refugees and the poor, a middle ring that houses merchants and the skilled working class, and an inner ring that houses the aristocracy and the Earth King's palace. The walls between rings are not metaphorical. They are literal. They require permission to cross. They make the class structure physically visible and physically enforced. The theory holds that Ba Sing Se's 3-ring design was not just inspired by real historical cities, which it clearly was, but that it also functions in the show as a metaphor for the political structure of the entire Earth Kingdom. The outer ring is the front line, people who are directly exposed to the war, who are fleeing the Fire Nation, who have the least protection and the most contact with danger. The middle ring is the functional economy, the class of people who benefit from the city's stability enough to have a stake in maintaining it, but who lack the power to actually influence how it is run. The inner ring is the power structure, the aristocracy, and the bureaucracy that have insulated themselves so completely from the outer rings that they can maintain the official position that there is no war happening. The Dai Li enforce this system, and the Dai Li are not simply a police force. They are, the theory argues, the physical manifestation of what happens when the middle and upper rings decide that the preferred response to the outer ring's reality is to pretend it does not exist. Long Feng's control of Ba Sing Se is possible because the city's architecture, its literal walls and rings and physical barriers, has already done the ideological work. By making the poor invisible to the wealthy through physical separation, by making it illegal to speak openly about the war, by controlling the information that crosses between rings, he has simply organized and enforced a suppression that the city's design already implied. This is why the fall of Ba Sing Se at the end of Book 2 hits with the weight it does. The city that survived a century by walling itself off from reality is conquered by a reality it refused to acknowledge. The Fire Nation does not break down the outer ring's wall and fight its way through. They enter from underneath, through the catacombs, through the hidden spaces that the walls and rings and official structures did not account for. They exploit exactly the kind of blindness that Ba Sing Se's power structure had been cultivating for 100 years. The Dai Li, who serve as Long Feng's instruments of suppression, defect to Azula. The city's own enforcers turn on the city. This is not simply a plot development. It is the show's commentary on what institutions built entirely around suppressing truth eventually become. Mechanisms of betrayal, looking for whoever offers them the most stability, because stability is the only value they were ever actually organized around. Ba Sing Se falls because it refused to look at what was coming. It built walls against reality rather than engaging with it. And the walls in the end did not protect it. They isolated it until the very thing it was trying not to see came up through the floor. The theory of what the avatar state actually does to a person. The avatar state is presented in the show primarily as a power enhancement. When Aang is in the avatar state, he is accessing the knowledge and the ability of every avatar who ever lived, channeled through his body into the moment at hand. It is, in the most visible sense, more. More power, more control, more options. The glowing eyes and the rising wind and the crushing force of 10,000 years of elemental mastery in one 12-year-old body. But the theory asks what that experience is like from the inside and what it costs. When a person carries another personality, even temporarily, even as a resource rather than an intrusion, there is a cost. The self is not infinitely expandable. Identity is not a container that can simply be filled to a larger size without the filling changing the container. Aang, in the avatar state, is not simply a more powerful Aang. He is Aang plus the accumulated weight of every person who held the role before him. He is pressed against the experience of genocide survivors from 100 years ago, and warrior avatars from 1,000 years before that, and diplomatic avatars from 2,000 years ago, and every other version of this role, across its entire history, simultaneously, in a body that is still physically 12 years old. The theory holds that this is part of why the avatar state is so dangerous and so difficult to control, not just because the power is hard to manage, though it is, but because the psychological experience of being multiple people at once, of having that many voices and that many memories and that many frameworks for the world pressing through you at the same moment, is genuinely destabilizing. The avatar state is a state of profound multiplicity, and the person who enters it has to find a way to remain themselves, distinctly and clearly themselves, in the middle of all that accumulated otherness. This is why Guru Pathik's teaching about the chakras is so essential to Aang's development. The chakra system, as the show presents it drawing from Hindu and Buddhist traditions, is fundamentally about the flow of energy through the self. Opening the chakras allows the energy to flow freely, but it also requires a clear and stable self to flow through. You cannot let energy move freely through a self that is not settled. The energy will simply amplify whatever disorder is already there. Aang's difficulty with the final chakra, the crown chakra, is usually explained as a failure of selflessness, of his attachment to Katara preventing him from releasing earthly bonds. And that explanation is given directly in the show. But the theory suggests that the deeper difficulty is that releasing earthly attachment, for Aang, would mean releasing the specific self he has built in the world, the self that cares about Katara and Appa and his friends and the ordinary pleasures of being alive. And that self is also the one thing that keeps him distinctly Aang, rather than the accumulated weight of every avatar who ever lived. His attachments are not just emotional preferences. They are the thing that makes him Aang and not simply the avatar. They are the anchor that keeps him from being dissolved into the role. The resolution in the finale, when the energy from the rock crack open his back during the battle, is not simply a physical trigger for the avatar state's return. It is a moment of dissolution and reconstitution. Aang lets go, not of his attachment to Katara, but of the fear that he will cease to be himself if he fully accepts the role. He lets the role in, completely, and finds that there is still someone there when the role settles, that the attachments survive, that Aang remains. And from that more complete occupation of himself, he can use energy bending, which requires exactly the kind of unbendable self he has just demonstrated he possesses. The avatar state, understood this way, is not just a power mode, it is a test. A continuous test of whether the person inside the role can remain a person while carrying the role's full weight. Every time the avatar state activates, it is asking, "Are you still there?" And every time Aang comes back from it, the answer is yes. The theory of what Iroh's tea actually tastes like. This one is smaller than the others. It is the kind of theory that exists not because it reveals something profound about the show's mythology, but because it is pleasant to think about. And sometimes that is exactly what you need. Iroh's tea is a subject of continuous discussion in the show. Zuko drinks it and makes faces. Soldiers drink it and describe it as wrong. Random people he offers it to are often more surprised by the quality than they expected. And Iroh himself treats the making and consuming of tea with a care and attention that is entirely disproportionate to what the people around him have been led to expect from life. The theory about Iroh's tea is that it is actually good, genuinely, remarkably good. Better than anything the people around him have ever had, by a considerable margin. And the reason they do not know how to respond to it is that good tea, truly good tea, tastes different from what most people call tea, in the way that a specific experience of art or music is different from what most people call art or music. It is in a different category. It asks something different from the person experiencing it. This sounds like a small point, but in the context of everything the theory about Iroh holds about who he is and what he went through and what he became, the tea is not a small thing. It is the daily practice of the understanding he came back from the spirit world carrying. That attention makes ordinary things extraordinary. That the preparation of something simple, done with full awareness and genuine care, is not less meaningful than the preparation of something complex. That the person who has survived the worst things life can offer and come out the other side with their capacity for pleasure intact is a person who has understood something most people never reach. Iroh's tea is good because Iroh is paying attention. He is paying attention to the water temperature and the steeping time and the quality of the leaves and the clay of the cup. He is present to the process in a way that most people, rushing through the ordinary activities of life, are not. And the result is a cup of tea that tastes like what it would taste like if the person making it was fully there while they made it. That is a small thing, and it is everything. The theory of where Avatar Aang goes when he meditates? The final theory of the night is the quietest one, the one that lives closest to the edge of sleep. Aang meditates throughout the series. He meditates to contact past avatars. He meditates to enter the spirit world. He meditates to prepare for battles and to recover from them. In almost every episode, there is at least one moment where Aang is simply sitting, eyes closed, somewhere that the other characters have learned to give him the space to be. The theory asks, where does he go when he meditates? Not the spirit world, necessarily, because that is a specific destination with specific rules and specific beings. The casual meditation, the between-scenes meditation, the meditation that does not produce a plot development, where does that put him? The answer the theory proposes is that Aang goes, in those moments, to the only place in his life that the 100-year sleep did not take from him. He goes back to the air temple, not the destroyed one, the empty stone halls where Gyatso's skeleton rests. He goes back to the way it was before. The courtyard in the morning, with the air cold and sharp from the altitude, the kind of cold that is also clean, the sound of the other students moving through their forms. The particular quality of light at that elevation, different from anything in the lower world, brighter and thinner and somehow more honest. The sound of Gyatso's laugh when Aang managed a particularly difficult technique. The smell of the vegetarian food in the communal dining hall. These things are gone. He knows they are gone. He has known since the day he found the temple. But in meditation, in the specific kind of stillness that sits just on this side of sleep, the mind does what it does. It returns to what it loved. It rebuilds what it lost. It inhabits the thing that shaped it, the environment that made it what it is, and for the duration of the quiet, it is there. Not as memory, exactly, as presence, as the alive recollection of a world that is over, but that the body has not entirely released. Katara and Sokka and Toph and Zuko see Aang meditating, and they give him the space. They understand, or they come to understand, that whatever he is doing when he is still like that, it is necessary. They do not know where he goes. They know that he comes back. They know that he comes back more settled, more centered, more ready for whatever the day is going to ask of him, and that is enough to warrant the space. He sits in the light of the present moment with his eyes closed, and somewhere beneath the present moment, in the part of the mind that does not entirely accept that the world only goes forward, a 12-year-old boy is in a courtyard at altitude, and the air is cold, and everything has not happened yet, and Gyatso is somewhere nearby, probably winning some game Aang is supposed to be paying attention to. That is where he goes. And when he opens his eyes, he brings a little of that with him, a little of the morning before the storm, a little of the cold, clean air above the clouds, a little of the world as it was before he had to save it. And he takes a breath, and he begins again. This is where we leave it tonight. The theories will be here when you come back. The world of Avatar will be there, exactly as you left it, full of rooms you have not entered yet, full of moments that look different in a different kind of light, full of old creatures who remember more than they say, and young ones who will become more than they know. Close your eyes. The air temple is quiet at this hour. The moon is full tonight, and steady, and looking down at all of it with the particular attentiveness of someone who has loved the world from a great height for a long time. Sleep well. A final thought on what makes a world feel real. Before the quiet comes completely, there is one more thing worth saying. Not a theory about a specific character or a specific event. A theory about Avatar itself. About what the show is doing, at its most fundamental level, that produces the feeling most of its long-term viewers describe when they try to articulate why they keep coming back. The feeling is something like recognition. You watch Avatar and you feel that this world has been there before you arrived. That it does not begin when Katara cracks open the ice and end when the final credits roll. that it has a history that extends in both directions from the story you are being shown, that it is organized by principles that operate whether anyone is watching or not, that it is populated by people who have lives outside the scenes they are given. This feeling is produced by accumulation, not by any single detail, however remarkable, not by the real Chinese calligraphy or the accurate chakra system or the faithful tracking of the lunar cycle. By all of it, working together, building the texture of a world that has been thought through all the way down. A world where the questions you are not going to ask are already answered, just not in the episode you are watching. They are in some other episode, or in the background of a scene, or in the way a character holds their body when they think no one is paying attention. The theory that the fan community has developed about what Avatar is, beneath the adventure and the characters and the mythology, is that it is an act of world building so thorough that it produces, in the people who engage with it, a kind of expanded perception. You watch Avatar and you start paying attention to the things the camera does not emphasize. You start wondering about what is in the rooms the story does not enter. You start thinking about the lives of background characters and the history implied by a single piece of architecture. And then you take that habit of attention with you into your own life, into the world you actually live in, and you notice things you would not have noticed before. This is the hidden function of great art. Not to be admired for its quality, but to train the perception of whoever encounters it, to make the eye more attentive, to make the mind more inclined to ask the next question after the obvious question, to make you a person who looks for what is not being pointed at, because you have learned from enough good stories that the things being pointed at are rarely the most important things. Avatar teaches this, not explicitly, not through any lecture or moral. Through the simple, repeated experience of discovering that the thing you thought you understood was more complicated and more interesting and more carefully made than you assumed. You think Top sleeps the way she does because she is comfortable. You discover she sleeps that way because her feet are her eyes. You think the calligraphy in the background of the scenes is decorative. You discover it is real classical Chinese, written by a scholar, saying specific things that you will never be able to read unless you know the language. You think Iroh is a funny old man who drinks too much tea. You discover he may have traveled to the spirit world and come back as something that does not quite have a name in the show's vocabulary. Each discovery deepens the world, and the deepening is pleasurable in a way that is different from the pleasure of plot development or character revelation. It is the pleasure of a world becoming more real as you look at it, of feeling the weight of something that was built with genuine care by people who could have done less and chose not to. That feeling of being met, being given something more than you asked for, being cared for by the people who made the thing you love, is a specific and irreplaceable pleasure. The theories in this video are part of that pleasure. They are the application of the show's own habit of attention to the questions the show left open. They are the show's invitation, extended across 20 years, for its audience to keep looking, to keep asking, to keep noticing the things that are there whether or not the camera lingers on them. The world of Avatar is real in the way that worlds built with love always become real. Not because it contains actual places or actual people, because it was thought through all the way down by people who believe that the things you do not notice are just as important as the things you do. That caring about the details, even the details no one will ever see, is the same thing as caring about the world, that the invisible architecture is what holds everything visible up. You have been listening to theories about that invisible architecture, and now the theories can settle, the way good things settle when the night is long enough and quiet enough for them to find their places. The air temple is still, the moon is out. Somewhere in the southern sea, the water is very cold and very dark and very quiet, and the blue light has been steady in the ice for as long as anyone has been alive to see it. Something is dreaming in there. Something has always been dreaming in there. And it will open its eyes again when the world is ready for it. Good night. The balance was always there, even when no one could see it. The balance is always there. And tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, you will watch the show again, and you will see something you have never seen before. Something that was always there, waiting for you to be the right version of yourself to notice it. That is the gift. That is what 20 years of theories are really about. The endlessly renewable discovery of a world that was built to be loved, by people who are not there to see you love it, but whose care for it reaches across every year between then and now, and meets you where you are, in the dark, at the end of the day, when the stories feel most real. The ice glows blue. The fire burns. The earth holds steady. The air carries everything that needs to be carried. Rest now. There is a version of every character in Avatar that exists only in the spaces between scenes. The version of Zuko who sat in his lavish Fire Nation rooms in the third season and stared at nothing and understood for the first time that getting what you wanted could feel worse than not having it. The version of Katara who stood over the ocean the night after Yue became the moon and did not know what to say to Sokka but stayed anyway. The version of Aang who woke from nightmares in the dark of the sleeping saddle and did not tell anyone what he saw because he had already asked too much of the people around him. These versions of the characters are real. The show implies them everywhere without stating them. They live in the gaps of a narrative that moves forward at the pace of adventure and cannot stop long enough to capture everything it knows about its own people. But the people are there, fully formed, in the negative space of every scene. You can feel them if you pay the right kind of attention. That is what Avatar is. Not just the scenes the show gives you. The whole thing, the scenes and the gaps and the implied lives and the unanswered questions and the theories that have accumulated like sediment over 20 years of people paying exactly the right kind of attention to exactly the right kind of show. You have been paying that attention tonight, and now you can let it go. Let the questions rest. Let the theories settle. Let the show and all its rooms and all its carefully made invisible things simply be what they are. Something worth returning to. Something that always has more to give. Good night.